I'm Brandon Miller, and you are listening to Coach. This weekly series dives deep into the world of Clifton strengths and how they impact your daily life. Hear from certified strengths coaches on the ins and outs, quirks, and characteristics of all 34 strengths and 4 domains and how they play out in real life. Let's get started. Hello and welcome. Today my guest is Susan Giacobazzi, all the way from North Lake Tahoe, California. She's been working with strength since 2017, and her company is called Love Your 5. Susan, welcome to the Strengths Whisperer.
Thanks, Brandon. I am so excited to be here.
Well, you know what? We get to talk to some amazing people here in season 2, Coach, and we are interviewing strengths experts. So you've been a part of strengths since 17. Tell us about your strengths journey and maybe give a little bit about your top 5.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. I hate to be dramatic, but it did kind of change my life. I have to say, I was really kind of in a stuck place in my career for sure. I had been wandering around trying this, that, and the other, and nothing was a great fit, and I wasn't feeling passionate about any work that I was doing. In fact, at the time, I was a project manager at a marketing company. And so I was dealing with other people's details all day long and so on. And I took this assessment, and my husband took it at the same time. And the light bulb went on. This is why I'm not happy, is because I'm trying to do things that are not me every single day. And no wonder I'm exhausted at the end of every day. No wonder I'm frustrated, and I just wasn't feeling it for that job. So then I really started exploring, how could I use this information in order to restructure how I spend every day and how I'm trying to make an income as well. So that was once I saw my top 5, which are individualization. So, loving to see the uniqueness from one person to another, empathy, number 2. So that's a pretty obvious one, how I'm using it in coaching. Ideation, number 3, loving to come up with new ideas. Intellection, number 4. So a lot of time in my brain, and then also activator. So getting the energy moving with not only myself, but with my clients too. So that's how I ended up in strengths. And then I realized, man, this tool could be used everywhere. So I have found myself working in organizations, primarily on communication. That's always been a specialty of mine. And that's how I ended up where I am with strengths.
Very cool. I don't think it's overstated when we talk about strengths changing our lives. I think there's many of us that could say that this philosophy, this approach, it challenged, ideas we had about ourselves, the way we thought about others, and you brought it right home. So I'm curious to hear a little more about, you and husband. Was it at the same time you learned your strengths?
Yeah, I think that was the other thing. So he's got a lot of he has achiever high. He has a lot of executing strengths, and that was exactly what I was watching this and being like, man, as soon as I get my act together and I'm organized and I get a lot done like he does, then that's when success is gonna follow. And it turned out that was not the case. It was like, as soon as I celebrate who I am, which doesn't happen to be that, then that's when success is going to come. And it was true. In our marriage, it absolutely made a difference because I was like, oh, he's getting a buzz off of that achiever. He's getting a buzz off of his to-do list, and I'm not. Things like that were huge aha moments. And some of the things that are high on my list are not as high on his. And so then I recognize this is where I need to be in the driver's seat on those things. Some things around parenting and so on to also change my parenting. So yes, it's been a great ride.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about, now inside of your work. So we're loveyour5.com, and you're working with different organizations, and I imagine some individuals perhaps within or on their own. So tell us about your most transformational story as a coach or in a consulting role so far when you think about working with strengths.
I love this question when I think about transformation, which takes time, right? I've been working with this organization for a couple of years now, but this one department was really struggling. So I was brought in not only to work with them, but first with leadership, and then we were going to move to the other departments. This client of mine as an individual was in management in this organization. And he has become one of my favorite clients because, man, this guy works so hard on who he is, wanting to be better at his job, better at everything else in his life too, being a husband and parent and so on too. So I find him very inspiring. But I met him first because I was doing a workshop with leadership, and it was a 3 hour workshop, and so we were coming up on the last 5 minutes, and the GM could see that I still had one more item on the end of the agenda that we had not gotten to, and he was like, guys, I really want to talk about that. Is it okay if we stay? Can we tack on another hour? Susan, is that okay? And I was like, sure, works for me. And everybody, of course, is nodding when the GM says we're we're going to spend more time, then you say yes. So I had
Not
asked a
not 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 really a question, right?
yeah, exactly. Of course, I will make time. So then I asked a question. I can't even remember now what it was. A round robin kind of situation in a workshop. Everybody's going around and answering, and then we get to this manager, and he was very passive aggressive and a little victimy and so on in his choices of how he was communicating, and was really upset that he had been asked to stay for an extra hour, and kind of what I would call throwing a tantrum, um, throwing the GM under the bus, kind of backhanded, not nice to me too, and so on. And I was completely shocked and so on, but we carried on, and he got himself together and so on. And so what do you know, next day in my inbox is a request that I should work a little more intensely one-on-one with this manager about his communication. He was having this problem with other employees. They were complaining about, man, he is so strict with the rules, and everything has to be just so, and just no discussion, no taking into account what is going on in this person's life or what the situation is, and that kind of a thing. So this is what I was hearing. And so we took a look at his strengths. He had belief, number one on his list, and then consistency and high achiever, and so a very structured and wanting to get things just so type of person, high analytical as well. And man, those were in the driver's seat at work. His phrase was, "If you're not 5 minutes early, then you're late to the meeting," and so on. And he just was very hardcore about this stuff. So we just started exploring: is it possible to be those things, because that is who you are, and here it is, on your strengths list? Is it possible to be those things and also be pleasant to be around? And is this actually motivating the people around you? Is this motivating the employees who report to you? And actually, what was going on around him was kind of turning into chaos because he wasn't having difficult conversations. He was letting everybody handle their own business instead of doing his job as the manager, and having the difficult conversations that needed to happen, which sometimes involve some feelings, and involve a little bit of digging into what's going on with a person and why are they behaving just the way they are, and so on. So you said the word transformation absolutely describes him, because now, after all of his hard work and bringing the right strengths forward and turning that dial down a little bit on some of those that have been in the driver's seat, I am hearing comments from other employees that he works with. Wow, he's just a different guy, and so much easier to approach. I feel safer walking into his office and asking for some time, or hey, can we talk this through, or can I bring you a crazy idea, or that kind of a thing. So much more approachable. And maybe, to me, the best outcome of all is that people are actually listening to him now. He was presenting himself in such a way that he was difficult to hear what he had to say, to hear what his opinion was, what his thoughts were, what his plan was, and so on. It was getting lost in his communication, and in everyone needs to work as hard as I do and do things the way that I do, which is when I say the belief was in the way, and so on, in that situation. So it's been a fun thing to watch as things have changed, and to get the feedback from other people that he's different to interact with now, and that his purpose is becoming, his truth, instead of just creating more chaos.
Yeah, unpacking that story, isn't it so apparent when someone acts up in a public workshop or training? that it's just a tale of how they are in most other places. And so what you're watching is the microcosm or the commercial of, oh, this is the regular episode all the time, but probably even more of what you're showing here in the public setting. And that when we have the ability to look at someone's strengths and get an idea of how those patterns of behavior, right? So that's recurring patterns of how one thinks, how one feels, how one behaves, and then we start to work backwards. Well, these patterns can go in a positive direction and be utilized for effective management in this case, or these patterns can be utilized in a less than helpful way and impede management. It'll actually impede your effectiveness and create some of the conditions you were describing where I don't feel safe. I don't feel heard. I don't feel like you care. Unfortunately, in the realm of management, it's both. It's the ability to touch performance and the personable side, right? If we don't touch performance and we over touchy feel it, then your management's going to talk to you, right? Hey, I'm glad your team is having fun and that they all like each other and you do the best potlucks ever in the history of the organization. But can we talk about what you're doing? Because you actually have to you got to hold people accountable. They have to do their job. You actually have to give them critical feedback when something isn't right. Like that's part of the job. But when you default too heavy there, right, and people feel starved of emotion, starved of interaction. So it's fascinating what you're describing when some strengths can learn to lean into the reality of who am I, who are these people on my team, and what do they need from me? What do they need? And so this is going to take us into the strength you have chosen for the day. We're going to talk about empathy. And I'm loving the opportunity to ask strengths experts. And then I'm going to talk about 4 domains. And with each one, it's so interesting to hear how you unpack it because empathy is a word we all know. It's a dictionary term. It's we could look this up, we could study it, and there's accepted terms that we would ascribe, and yet Clifton and the team decided to use that word with its own description and its own understanding. And so, please tell us about empathy and what our listeners can learn from you today on this one. And I'll help dig in with you as we go further in the topic.
I completely agree with you. It's been interesting as you go through the different Clifton strengths, how some of them are part of our English language. And so that can be a pro and a con because it can send you down a road of thinking you know what it means, and it may not be exactly that, right? And in fact, the word, sympathy, compassion are both very similar to empathy in the English language and, American English language anyway. And they are different. They are, slightly different. And so this is something I have a conversation with, people who have high empathy or lower empathy on their list too on a regular basis. Empathy in this context is about that you are picking up on this extra signal. You have this sixth sense, your gut is telling you something. It usually has to do with the emotions of other people and so on. And you can just kind of pick up on their vibe. That's the most scientific word I can come up with to describe it. So somebody walks in the room and they're a little off. And the better you know them and the more you care about them, the stronger that signal is. And this is how I like to talk about it is it's this signal that's coming in and that other people, it's not as strong of a signal for other people. So you're hearing this signal, it's kind of soaking in your pores, whether you want it to or not. We all know when our partner walks in the door after a long day at work, and maybe it wasn't a great day of work and they're just not themselves. So that high empathy is soaking it in and recognizing it immediately and therefore having a hard time shutting it off. Like I can't just walk past you and pretend like it's not happening. So to me, that's where the work is in how do you manage that signal that's coming in? It's not necessarily about, and I think this is what the misnomer can be, is that it's not necessarily that you do something about it or that you feel terrible or sorry for that person who's having that emotion in that moment. You could be having quite the opposite. Sometimes I'm like, some of those high empathy people are the most judgmental people out there, including myself. So I think in coaching empathy, it becomes recognizing, okay, that's what's at work right now, is that I'm picking up on how other people are feeling. And now what am I going to, I need to stop and think about what's the smart thing to do right now? How am I going to react to that? Solving their problem may not be the answer. Sometimes listening to them is the answer. Sometimes you're like, no, I need to go do my work and I'll talk to them later. It comes up a lot in people I just had a client last week, very high empathy number one on her list, and was struggling with, she walks in somebody's office and she's about to delegate, and she sees how busy they are, and she has a hard time saying, yeah, I'm going to add to your list. I'm going to pile this on your desk too. And so these are the things, this is what I'm talking about, especially at work, how it can kind of get in the way sometimes. People love it about you, but it also can get in your way too, just like all the strengths.
So we think about empathy in terms of the ability to sense what other people are feeling and to take positive steps, which could be listening, could be sharing, could be offering, some sort of needed resource, whatever that is. Empathy seems to have an action component to it based on what I'm sensing or feeling. And I've talked to people with low empathy, and I'm one of those. I'm a bottom five empathy, and I encourage them with this. So if you're listening, here's good news. If Clifton Strength says your empathy is low, we have not labeled you a sociopath. So just good news. You still can be caring.
You
You
have
still can be
feelings.
considerate.
You could
You
be in
can
a
console
relationship.
people. Yes, you can. You can. However, next to someone with top 5 or 10 empathy, your perception will likely be different. Your sensitivity will likely be different. Your needs will be different from what you require from relationships, and knowing that this particular strength, because I've always associated the leaders who I see leverage this strength very well are intuitive listeners. So they actively listen and they hear what is said and what is not being said. So they have this perception of, I'm hearing what you're saying, the unspoken. We're having a conversation with our mouths, and it's almost like we are also having a conversation in our minds about what you're not saying to me. There's this scene from one of the trilogy of Lord of the Rings, and I think it's when one of the characters is talking to another, and Galadriel, she's the elf princess, mystic, and this conversation's going, and all of a sudden Gladys like, you've seen this thing, and you have. And so her and the character are smiling at each other while they're talking here, and I'm like, it's empathy. They can do that. They can read our thoughts. They know what we're thinking. And having been around many leaders with this, it can feel at times like, hey, stop reading my mail. Like, can I just, put up my front and you not penetrate? And that, unfortunately, we like to say, empathy lets you in. Empathy can, that sensitivity can be highly perceptive. And when it's on its game, that's leverage, that information is taken in for, how do I help? How do I serve? How do I support? How do I engage? Now, we would be remiss though if we didn't talk about one of the downsides to this particular strength. And I'm wondering how you have ever considered or seen this. And this is a little anecdotal, so I can't quote the source. I can only quote the source of the source. So this is way back when I went through certification. And one of our instructors told us a story about a high empath, or somebody very high in empathy. And it came through the study of people who had been prosecuted for conning people out of things. So it was those who were, I'm going to say, successful con artists, and they did some sort of study that I cannot quote, where empathy was a top strength of these people. That they had, their empathy was so acute that they could empathize with people and then find themselves, ingratiated to them, and then they took advantage of that relationship. They preyed upon it. And in my years, I guess I have I'm curious, because you are a high empath. Is that a watch out? Is that something that an empath has to be aware of, that you can cross into a place of trust quickly. You can cross into a place where there's an openness to your advice. There's an openness, a receptivity, because there's this feeling of warmth and receptivity, and I feel safe. I feel heard. Is that something a high empath is aware of?
Absolutely. I do believe that. It reminds me, I say to my young adult kids all the time, I'm like, use your strengths for good and not evil, right? It's like every single one of them could be used in some way that is not for, the good of humankind, for sure. I agree with you. If you think about what building rapport is, that is exactly that of like, I read you and I see what you need. And it absolutely is an ability to see, one person will want to do a deep dive into what they think and how they feel. And they'll tell you their life story quickly. And somebody else, it's like, no, I'm a slow burn and it takes me a while. And so I think empaths pick up on things like that very quickly. I many times have, I don't know, predicted things that have to do with he's gonna, I remember, my nephew was gonna ask my niece to marry, or his now wife to marry him. I definitely pick up on things more quickly than others, or like I say, when somebody's a little off, and so on. And then you can decide what to do with it. Like I was saying earlier, it's like, okay, I have this information now. How would this be the most
Do
beneficial?
people with empathy early in that journey test their theories? I think that he's going to ask her to marry him, and like, do you just wait and see, like, was I right? Ooh, I was right, and then start to do you test that as you become more aware of empathy?
I think, the skill that I feel like I've developed throughout my adult life is in asking the right questions so that it can come out. I'm going to open the door so that if you want to talk about, that topic or something like that, then I'll open the door so they can choose to or choose not to have the conversation instead of me just saying, like, hey, I already figured you out. Right. I also have to keep myself, and I think this is probably true about, most strengths too. It's like these things that are instinct to us, those things at the top of our list that are just kind of happening without us trying. Sometimes it's not pretty and sometimes it is, you're not right. And sometimes you can't get too far into like, oh, I already have you figured out. Like you never know. You don't know until you ask the right questions and that you can hear, what the listener has to say or what your communication partner has to say.
Okay, well, Susan, we're going to wrap up our time, and our sponsor is 34 Strong, and the resource that all of our listeners may have access to is what we call "How to Be a Good Teammate to Me." And inside of this inventory are the contributions and needs of each of the 34 strengths, and then a really cool exercise that talks about how to get the best of me from that contribution and needs space. And so when that comes at the end, you will all know, dear listeners, what we're talking about. But I am going to take Susan now through the contributions and needs of empathy, and you can tell us which ones of these resonate, maybe which ones don't, just to give a real life sample of what we can do with this resource. So, Susan, contributions: emotionally tuned with others' feelings.
Yes.
Okay, yep. I was going to say, based on what you said, good listener,
Yes.
tender hearted.
I like to think of it as realistic.
Okay, okay. How about anticipating the needs of others?
Yes.
Compassionate,
Yes.
considers and understands others' perspectives.
Yes. That's yes.
How about kind?
Mostly.
Okay, mostly. That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so we're all but one on that side. All right, needs. So these are needs to you. Okay, needs to you. You can tell us if these relate. People to listen, see, and hear them.
Yes.
Non-judgment.
That's true. Yep.
How about gentleness? A need for others to be gentle with you.
Yes. And as far as emotions go, I think that's a common one to talk about with the high empath is sometimes just because you are anticipating other people's needs doesn't mean that others will do the same for you.
My wife is strong in relationship building strengths, and in our 30 years of marriage, I have found that it's less about what I say and it's more about how I say it. There is more pushback on how I say something than what I said. If how I say it is not gentle with no judgment, then I can be 100% right and 100% wrong at the exact same time. And logic is no longer relevant because of the feeling that what I said was not presented with grace, with kindness, with love. So tone, body language, posture count more to you than what I just said. What I said matters, but if I can present it in a way that you can hear me, then we can relate, which is very different for a high influence. I perceive different.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
have a different way I feel, but I've respected now that the world belongs to relationship builders. It is the number one most common domain in the world by a pretty good margin. And so if we don't respect, appreciate, and engage, emotional discord is not fun in any relationship in our lives. How about awareness to your needs?
Yeah.
You need others to be aware of your okay. How about emotional freedom to laugh, to cry, to vent, to let the emotion out?
Yes, I think to acknowledge the emotions and so on. I do think another misnomer of empathy can be that we are emotional people, and don't think that's necessarily true. I'm not easy to cry, or my emotions are not super high, low, that kind of a thing. But to acknowledge that I'm having feelings about it. Yeah.
You're right. That would be a bit of a stereotype
Yes. Yep.
that one
Yep.
should avoid with strengths. Yeah. Okay. How about this last one? Others to be present in the moment and feel what's happening with you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's the number one thing on the high executor married to the high relationship building is I'm like sit down on the couch and have a conversation and tune in. So yes.
Thank you so much, so much for joining us today. Susan Giacobazzi, North Lake Tahoe. Loveyour5.com. Susan, any other place people can find you if they want to learn what you're doing and how to connect?
That's about it. I love to, yeah, there are places there where you can contact me specifically.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much for our time, dear listeners. In just a moment, our sponsor is going to tell you again about the free resource that you can have access to, how to be a good teammate to me. Until then, thank you for joining us on season 2 of the Strengths Whisperer and Coach to Coach. Thank you, Susan, for joining us today.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you for tuning in to the Strengths Whisperer Coach to Coach. Please feel free to reach out to Brandon to partner with 34 Strong for collaboration opportunities to serve your employees or clients together. If you are a strengths coach, lead a strengths-based team, or are a fan of strength, we invite you to receive our complimentary resource, How to Be a Good Teammate to Me, Understanding My Contributions and Needs. Email Brandon_Miller at 34strong.com to connect, and he will gladly share this resource that will continue to unlock the power of strength.